Welcome to Chisel and Compass, where deep-rooted wisdom meets the crossroads of faith, entrepreneurship, and mindset. I'm the real Jason Duncan, and he's Dr. Justin Moseley, the Mindset Doctor. And we're here to help you refine your vision and navigate life's toughest challenges with purpose-driven strategies and real-world insights. Each episode, we're going to dive into faith-driven leadership, business growth, personal development, and the mindset shifts that drive lasting success. Now, whether you're building your business, enhancing your leadership skills, or pursuing personal growth, this podcast equips you with the tools and perspectives you need to lead with conviction and live with impact. This isn't just about where you're going, it's how you get there. So let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Chisel and Compass. Is America a Christian nation? You know, that question has been argued for generations, and some would say that our Constitution is silent on God, so the answer must be no. Others point to Bible verses carved in stone across most of our government buildings, and they say, well, it's undeniable. Today, Dr. Justin Moseley and I are digging into the history, the founding documents, and a powerful answer from Charlie Kirk just about a year before his death to ask, what's the truth about America's Christian roots, and what does it mean for us today? Welcome back to another episode of Chisel and Compass. I'm one of your hosts, the real Jason Duncan, and he is
the Mindset Doctor, Dr. Justin Moseley.
And we're here to talk about, on this show, about the intersection between faith, business, and mindset. Now, both of us are business owners, we're entrepreneurs. We're both students of mindset, and he's the mindset doctor. I'm a Napoleon Hill certified leader. Like we are really into mindset. And today we're going to come to you as followers of Christ who might not have exactly the same opinion on the answer to this question: is America a Christian nation? And since we're dealing with the day we're recording this is only, I think, 3 days after the Charlie Kirk memorial, and only a week and a half after his assassination. And we hesitated. We talked about whether or not we should talk about this publicly. And so this is not as much about Charlie Kirk as it is the question, is America a Christian nation? But the reason we're even thinking about it is because of Charlie's influence on that concept about the Christian faith and how it ties in with our country. There's been a lot of accusations, and Justin, you and I have been talking about this behind the scenes, of Charlie being a Christian nationalist, which he denied outright many times. He is a nationalist and he's a Christian, but he did never put those two things in the same thing. He's been accused of lots of things, but today really it's not as much about him as it is about, are we a Christian nation? So before we get into anything else specifically, Justin, I want to give you a moment to kind of present your ideas before we start.
Yeah, because you proposed that question to me when we were talking about ideas of like, and I think it went back to the founding of our country. Was our country based on Christian principles, and is it a Christian nation? And thinking about growing up, and could be a whole other podcast episode we do, just about our influences we have around us influences our thoughts. So for me, growing up, being from the South, we're in the Bible Belt for one thing, but also I went to a Christian private school. So I was in a Christian environment. And just thinking about saying the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, and hearing God in the Constitution, and just thinking about, okay, the forefathers, they were breaking free because they wanted freedom, but also freedom of religion. So in my mind, I just assumed, yeah, it was based on Christian principles, and we are a Christian nation. But a lot of that just stemmed from my upbringing and my surroundings. But then I remember years ago hearing a study that goes back to our upbringing. Like if you're in the South, you can just assume if you're in a group of people, a lot of people are believers. And we assume that everybody's like that. But you go to different parts of the country and we're in the minority as believers. And I remember hearing a study that like in England, they have all these beautiful churches that are 1,000 years old and more. And you like think, oh man, that's amazing. The whole country must go to church. And there was a study of like less than 5% of people over there even go to church. So it's like, it just in our minds from our own upbringing that hey, I was surrounded by, hey, everybody's just Christian. That's just what we do. So that probably influenced my belief on, yeah, we were founded as Christians. This is a Christian nation.
So for my background, I spent 13 years in pastoral ministry and then became a school teacher. And when I taught school, I taught American history, and I taught from early exploration up through the Civil War. And my favorite part of teaching American history was the founding of our nation in those early formative years up to the Revolutionary War and up to and beyond that. And, teaching Constitution, teaching the Bill of Rights, teaching the articles of the Constitution and what that meant in the three branches of our government. I mean, to me, that I don't know if kids are being taught civics today as well as were taught years ago, but I really enjoyed that. But I came at it from a different perspective than most people who have my background would come at it. I was someone who didn't believe that this nation was a Christian nation, and I assumed, as most do, this country, or not assume, but believe that this country was indeed built on biblical principles, because that is undeniable. I don't know how anybody would deny that. And the God that they're referring to is not Allah. It is not some Hindu god. It is not the Buddha. It is Jehovah. That's who it's referring to. And there's really that is really not even up for debate. What I think it was up for debate is it Jesus? That was the thing, which would make it Christian. And an interesting thing about that, and we'll probably do an episode on this, so I don't want to tease out too much of this, but I have not called myself or referred to myself using the term Christian in well over a decade. I just don't like that term, and I'm not going to get into it today. So when you say is America a Christian nation, it also bubbles up that word Christian. I have some issues with that, which you'll just have to keep listening to the podcast if you want to know. Right. We'll do another episode on that one. We're going to play a clip in just a few minutes of Charlie Kirk on stage answering the question about what he believes on whether or not America was a Christian nation. We're not going to get to that yet, but we're going to show that. And what we know is that if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it does mention God 4 times, but the Constitution never mentions God, and that's true. Modern academics say that the founders of our country were Enlightenment deists, and I think Thomas Jefferson would probably fall into that. It's famously known that Thomas Jefferson, our third president, had a Bible, even though he believed in God, where he had ripped out or blacked out everything that was supernatural. So while he believed that Jesus was great and he followed his teachings, any supernatural, he would black it out and didn't agree with that. And so those are all things that kind of influenced a little bit of my belief that I don't believe it's a Christian nation or based on Christianity as a religion, but certainly on biblical principles. It's absolutely 100% on biblical principles. It just never overtly talked about Christ. So that was why I came to what I believed. And ladies and gentlemen, I believed that and held on to that to my detriment, because I think that I'm not to my detriment, but I guess to the chagrin of most people, because as a former pastor and as a very dedicated follower of Jesus, people think I'm nuts for saying that, America's not a Christian nation necessarily. But it wasn't until I watched this clip with Charlie Kirk that I began to change my mind. And I'm not sure where I'm landing yet, but that's what this show is about. So let me play for you this clip. It's 5.5 minutes. We'll put in our show notes the clip to where you can go. I mean, we're going to show the whole thing, but it was part of a longer conversation where he was on stage with a couple of other gentlemen who are Christian apologists, and an audience member asked this question.
I was articulated yesterday by a couple of my friends that our country was not founded on Christian principles. Our country was founded on common law because the Declaration only refers to God 4 times and the Constitution doesn't refer to God at all. And it only articulates the structure of government.
Remember that we were a collection of states and colonies, and you need to read the state constitutions before anything else. 9 out of 13 of the original states required you to be a Bible-believing Christian to serve in government at the time of the founding. Even in actually, 13 out of 13 required a declaration of faith. 9 out of 13 required you to be a Protestant, except Maryland, which was Catholic, which still required a declaration of faith. In almost every single one of the original state constitutions, Pennsylvania included, they had I profess Lord and Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior in the original state constitutions. So you remember, we're a collection of states before that. Secondly, 55 out of 56 of the original signers of the Declaration were Bible-believing, church-attending Christians. You asked about common law. So common law is inherited from Blackstone, who was Christian. A common law is an outgrowth of the scriptures. So let's go to three principles of common law: presumption of innocence, due process, and jury of your peers. All three are biblical principles. So, and all wrapped into the ultimate biblical principle that you shall not favor justice if you are rich or poor, which is in Leviticus 19, right before the most famous part of Leviticus 19, which is that you should love your neighbor as yourself. But before that is that in the administration of justice, you shall not favor the rich or the poor, which is the idea of blind justice. We get that in the West, which is incorporated also in the New Testament ideal: neither slave nor Greek nor Jew, you are all one in Jesus Christ, which we get the idea of human equality. These are all biblical ideas. They're not Enlightenment ideas, which is they kind of get conflated at the time. But more importantly than that, they say that God was only mentioned 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. Well, that's a big deal, okay? Laws of nature and nature's God. The last paragraph of the Declaration reads as a prayer. It says, we appeal to the supreme judge of the universe. Who's the judge of the universe? Jesus Christ, as it says in Revelation, that Jesus will judge the earth on his throne. So in the Declaration, they were praying to Christ our Lord as a prayer very specifically. Thirdly, as I said on stage yesterday, Deuteronomy was by far the most quoted book, religious or non-religious, in the time of the founding when they were putting together the Constitution, more than John Locke, more than Montesquieu, more than Blackstone. So the book of Deuteronomy, which talked about laws, customs, traditions. It was Moses' farewell address as he's about to say goodbye, say, hey, good luck in Canaan, guys. Here's how you should set up your form of government. But finally, and most importantly, let's look at actually what the founders said. John Adams famously said the Constitution was only written for a moral and religious people. It was wholly inadequate for the people of any other. The body politic of America was so Christian and was so Protestant that our form and structure of government was built for the people that believed in Christ our Lord. One of the reasons we're living through a constitutional crisis is that we no longer have a Christian nation, but we have a Christian form of government, and they're incompatible. So you cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian population. So that's just a surface level belief. So then they'll go to the First Amendment, which has two parts of the First Amendment which get conflated. First of all, separation of church and state is not in the U.S. Constitution. That is a single letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1807 to the Danbury Baptist Convention in Massachusetts, assuring them that the government would not come after the church, okay, which is the opposite of what they would say. However, that was then resurrected by the Warren Court and the Burger Court in the 60s, where they said, hey, all of a sudden, we're now going to make this as if it's the Constitution. It does say in the Constitution 2 things, which is the Establishment Clause and the Free Expression Clause. The Establishment Clause is that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What they were most worried about was a Presbyterian or a Anglican or a Quaker type religion taking over the federal government. Instead, it was that there is not going to be a state-run religion or a state-run government. Did you know that one of the first acts of Congress was taxpayer-funded Bible printing and distribution? Did you know that there were church services held in the Supreme Court building as late as the Jackson presidency in the 1820s? But going back to this idea of separation of church and state, and again, I could riff on this ad nauseum because it's just so ridiculous, right? Is that it's not biblical because first, it's not biblical. It's not constitutional because you go a layer deeper. People that even say that, do you believe in separation of morality and state? Nobody does. So all laws are a reflection of morality, and all morality comes from somewhere. There is no such thing as neutral morality. And we believe what the founders believed because they put it in the halls of Congress, they put it in the Supreme Court, and they put it all throughout the country, which is that the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, is the core morality of how a society and a civilization should exist, right? The 10 Commandments of every person. And finally, and this is the kicker, if the founding fathers were not Bible-believing church-attending Christians, why did they put Leviticus on the Liberty Bell? Not John, not Psalms, not Proverbs, not Genesis, Leviticus. Most Americans can't spell Leviticus. Leviticus 25:19, proclaim liberty throughout the land of which you are in. It is one of the most sinister, most unsubstantiated lies that does not come up against any sort of academic scrutiny. This idea that founding fathers were a bunch of Enlightenment common law deists. The reason they hate it is because the reason they must say this is that if we actually go back to our Christian roots and we go back to where we once were, it's America's best hope for revival and for a great future.
So obviously Charlie does what seems to be a masterful rebuttal to the accusation that this is not a Christian nation. And so masterful, as I said earlier before we played the clip, that it has actually caused me to reconsider. Now, I will say this for the record, only because I believe that a lot of the people who would listen to this in the current context of what we're dealing with may believe that, well, I've just been a huge Charlie Kirk fan, and that's the only reason we're doing this. No, actually, I knew who he was, but I didn't really know anything about him. I didn't know. So it was only after his assassination that I dove into it, because people were saying such terrible things about him. I thought, well, I'd never really heard any of that bad stuff, so let me go look into it. And I watched the entire interview. That clip was only a 5.5 minute. I watched the entire time he was on stage, and I was like, this is pretty amazing. And this particular 5.5 minutes caused me to pause and say, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm wrong about this. Now, I will say, and Justin, you know me well enough to corroborate this with our audience, is that I've never made a deal about this. I've never said anything about it. I've never tried to argue with people that, oh, we're not a Christian nation. It was never an issue for me. It was not an argument point that I was willing to make. And frankly, still isn't technically. But after today, let's dig into this a little bit. So first of all, Justin, what are your thoughts before we break this down, his arguments? Because that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at every point he made and kind of break it down and see if it's true or not.
Yeah, I think it was interesting hearing the history, because I think even reading the Bible, not just reading it for our own lens, the context of what we're going through today, but what were they going through at that time? And then one thing that I never realized, like I just took the Constitution as it was written by those men and it was law, but not like Charlie said of like, no, it came down to these states that were the colonies, and they had to be Christian to be able to serve in government. Like I never knew that, but knowing that's where we started. And I think something to bring up in this podcast, because obviously the overarching theme is, are we a Christian nation, comes back to where we were founded. But I want to kind of bring it full circle to, are we a Christian nation today? And I think that's kind of where, okay, maybe we started somewhere, but how did we lose our way? Because I think that's one of the eye-opening things with Charlie's assassination was God is moving at this point because of who he was and what he did, and what we just witnessed recently with his service that was held with all these top leaders, world leaders that were in attendance, and a lot of them even professing Jesus on a world stage. So going back to the founding of it, like that was eye-opening to me. Like I didn't know that, they had to be Bible believing Christians to be able to even serve in government. And that's where our government started. So that was pretty powerful.
Well, he did mention in there that the incompatibility of a non-Christian nation now, which he asserted that we were not a Christian nation today, based on the Christian principles. That's the problem. That's why we're having a constitutional crisis now. And I'd never heard anybody espouse that before. And so it made sense to me. It's like, well, that is the reason. So I think that we need to, we're dealing with a lot of stuff right now. This is not about right and left, Democrat and Republican. This is frankly is not even about Christian versus non-Christian. This is just looking at the assertion, is America a Christian nation? And if so, what is that? What are the implications? Well, so one of the things he said was that the state constitutions had some sort of religious faith test to be a member of that state. And I did go look that up. Most 9 out of the 9 through 11, depending on how you count it, of the 13 colonies, original colonies, and that became states, required a Christian or Protestant faith declaration if you were going to hold office, not to live in the state. I think I misstated that, but if you're going to hold office, you had to have that. The exceptions were Virginia and New York, and of course, as he pointed out, Maryland was a Catholic state, so they wouldn't have a Protestant declaration. It would have been a Catholic, and so what that tells us, that whether the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence was overtly or even undercover Christian document, is that the states were not undercover about it. They were like, you have to declare Jesus. Now, one of the phrases that he uses is the phrase I think that causes left-leaning AI organizations like ChatGPT to say that he's wrong, because if you pour this into most AI, they're just left-leaning, which is unfortunately a lot of times against the Bible and against Christianity. That's not true for everybody. I know a lot of people who are on the left that love Jesus, and that is not a statement that they don't. But a lot of times these organizations that are more liberal and left leaning will deny some of this stuff. And what it says that, well, he said that we're Bible believing, church attending Christians. Okay, what does that mean today versus what it meant in the 1700s? Probably very different.
Yeah.
Probably very, very different. So I would assume that's probably part of the disagreement there. He also said 55 of the 56 founders had some sort of a Christian affiliation or were church attending. Now, there's obviously a range here. Some were very devout, some were nominal, some were deists or Unitarians. And so Bible believing, yes, true for most, but certainly not for all. But again, I think the overwhelming thing we see is that Christianity had a huge role in the founding of the country. This is where he gets into, now those things I was more familiar with, Justin, but when he gets into this common law and Blackstone.
Let me push back on that one for a second too, because yes, let's say 55 out of 56 even were devout Christian believers and they founded this thing. I also think about your mastermind group. You say it's not a Christian group, but you are, and we won't use the term Christian, you are a believer, you're a follower of Jesus, and most of the group you've attracted is followers of Jesus, but you still say that it's not a Christian group. So it's still, that's where it's tough. Like when we're saying, is the nation a Christian nation? Not necessarily just because all these people have the same beliefs and the same principles doesn't mean it's a Christian nation because of that.
Yeah, and that's where that's where the wording becomes a weird thing. Is this a nation based on biblical principles? I don't think anybody could argue that at all. I think maybe a very devout atheist might take issue with that, but otherwise, there's no denying that it was based on biblical principles. It's the idea as a Christian, I think, is the thing that we have to contend with. Now, he gets into the argument about common law and Blackstone. And Blackstone, as he stated, was in fact a Christian, and his commentaries shaped American law, and his commentaries were written from his perspective as a Christian. Now, whether they were overtly written because Jesus said so, like that's a whole nother thing, but it was, the foundation was explicitly Christian natural law. That's where Blackstone got that's where he got his legal principles. They came from the Bible, like presumption of innocence. That Deuteronomy 19, like we're going to presume someone innocent unless there's multiple witnesses. And we read that in the law, the books of the law in the beginning of the Old Testament. There's equality before the law. No matter who you were, there was equality. And Scripture influenced due process. It influenced jury trial. Those are all things. Leviticus 19, as he mentioned, all of this was adopted into English and American common law. Where from? It came from Christianity. Now, you might say, well, and this is where I would argue against myself currently, is that, well, that was all Leviticus and Deuteronomy. That was not Christian. That was Jewish. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, there we go. Like, okay, that's not Christian. That's Jewish. Now, Jesus was not a Christian. Jesus was a Jew, but he
Right.
came to fulfill the law and to start a new way, a life of spirit and grace. And so that's where this term Christian starts becoming a little blurry again. You want to respond to that?
Yeah, and I think that's where we take that into that other episode of diving into the Christian term. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, the principles are there. I think there's no denying that. And I think when he goes on to say about the morals, like morals they have to come from somewhere. There would be no good and evil if there wasn't a moral base, and the moral base seems to be scriptural.
Yeah. Now, they're also in the Declaration of Independence. The guy in the comment at the beginning said there was only 4 mentions of God in the Declaration of Independence. And Charlie's position was only
Right,
only
it's a big
4.
deal.
Like you're writing a document to declare independence from the most powerful nation in the world, and you're going to mention God 4, not once, not twice, but 4 times. That's pretty substantial. And I didn't really ever think about it until he put it that way. It's like, okay, that is significant. So the references to God in the Declaration of Independence, the words are nature's God, creator, supreme judge of the world, and divine providence. Those are all things that we would agree is Jesus creator. Yes. In John 1, all things were created by him, for him. Nothing was created that was not with him. Like Jesus is the creator. nature's God. Who is nature's God? Well, again, that goes back to who the creator is. Supreme judge. Charlie did a great job of pointing out, well, who is the supreme judge according to the biblical writings? Well, that is Jesus Christ, as revealed in Revelation. And then divine providence, like who's divine other than God? I mean, that's all through Jewish history, through the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament. Divine providence reveals Yahweh, Jehovah. And then we are taught in the New Testament, for those of us that follow Jesus, that they are one. They're the same. Yeshua, if you want to call him Yeshua or Jesus, however you want to refer to it, Yeshua and Yahweh were one with the Holy Spirit. So, and then finally he said that on that particular point about the Declaration of Independence, that the final paragraph was written as a prayer. I'd never really thought about that.
Right.
But that's really, really clever, even though it didn't say, "Dear God, Amen."
Mm-hmm.
Like they were appealing to a higher being that they called God. That's pretty good evidence that this is a nation based on biblical principles, if not the God of the Bible, who is Jesus.
Yeah, I never heard that kind of. Yeah, I never thought of it that way because, ending in a prayer, it makes sense. And then looking back at just a governmental document is one thing, but now seeing the influence it had, and that's where I think it comes that there is no denying it. And whether you're a believer or not, I think you can look at the document and say it was, to its root, a Christian influenced document. And in other words, a Christian influenced nation from the beginning.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that he said was the most quoted sources coming from the Bible, and Deuteronomy is more cited than John Locke or Montesquieu. And interestingly enough, there was a study done by a guy named Donald Lutz who looked into this and actually found out that Deuteronomy is the most cited text in the founding era of political writings. Now, again, Deuteronomy is not Christian; it is Jewish. But it is the precursor to who we believe is the King of the universe, who is Jesus, who was a Jew, came to reveal that. So what does that reveal about the founders' worldview? Is that it reveals that they believe that these documents are the foundation of everything we believe to be is true, and they were not Jews themselves. That is the kicker, right? Even though it was a Jewish document, the men who wrote using this as supporting documents claimed it as a Christian document because of Christ. That's where it's starting to turn me in the direction of, oh, okay, I see how we can say that. And then John Adams, second president, he said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for any other. It boggles my mind to watch these people on Instagram and TikTok, YouTube, argue publicly that the Constitution needs to be like it's a document we should throw away and start over. Like it boggles my mind. Well, what does that tell you? Well, John Adams was right. That Constitution ain't for that person. They're not a moral and religious society. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And that's where so many people get triggered these days by hearing it because it goes against what they believe. And instead of just being accepting, and I think that's one thing as believers, like we can be okay with somebody's differing opinion and not get triggered and not yell and argue and fight about it. But we can just look at, and that's why I'm glad you found this video of Charlie, because it opened my mind to a deeper understanding. Instead of me just assuming and believing in my own mind, it gave me deeper belief in, you know what, this is where we began. It makes me want to know, like, what can we do to turn more to that? How can I be an example for Jesus to help this nation get back to where it was founded? I'm curious for you, has that now, whether it was Charlie's assassination, the service they had for him, seeing the world leaders, has anything recently, like I feel we're seeing it on Instagram and different things, people sharing stuff. Have you felt a shift even in you of like, hey, maybe there's something we can do about this, or how do we share our faith or be an example?
Yeah, I actually held a mastermind session at the Standard Club the Wednesday after his assassination, so 1 week. And these are all high level players in the Nashville business scene, executives, entrepreneurs, etc. And it was a 2-hour mastermind session. And the first person to go that night, her thing that she wanted to talk about was, how do we as leaders, as the owners, as the entrepreneurs, how do we communicate that what we believe in a way that doesn't isolate or alienate people, but also doesn't want to make us hide? Because she had posted something about all these accusations about how terrible Charlie Kirk was, that it was hurting. Like she had two 20-something-year-old kids that were devastated at his assassination. And then she's watching other 20-something-year-old kids celebrate in the streets. And she said, she wrote a Facebook post about this. And then she had one of her agents, she's in real estate, she had one of her agents reach out and say something nasty about it. And so her whole point was, what do we do about this? And so, yes, it did make me think about it, because I don't, other than maybe this show, I'm not overtly public with these ideas. I don't ever talk about these things. Now, the people who are closest to me know what I believe. I don't hide it. My faith, however, generally speaking, is always on display, and I think in an appropriate way. My clients know that I follow Jesus. I pray with my clients as a group when we meet, but I'm not trying to preach to them or proselytize. So I think there's this balance that we need to take. But to your question, is this a reawakening of people actually talking about Jesus in the public space again? I think so, and I hope so. We need to talk about it. He is, for all of the people who might disagree that he existed or he wasn't who he said he was, you cannot deny the fact that if you just look at a calendar, how's that calendar based? When he lived, that is when our calendar started. 0. Yeah. Listen, you can argue all you want. There is something there worth considering. Now, the other thing that he said was this separation of church and state. He addressed this, which I thought was an interesting and unnecessary part of, at least from my perspective, that I don't think he needed to go there, but he did. Right. So many people believe that there's this idea of separation of church and state. As a matter of fact, if you took a microphone and polled 100 people on the street in downtown Nashville, says is separation of church and state a law? Is it a thing? I think well over 90% of the people go, yes, it is. Yeah. We've been lied to, because it's not there. There is nothing in the Constitution that separates church and state. There's the Establishment Clause that says that Congress can make no law that should alter or prohibit the free exercise of any religion. So what this letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802 is when he mentioned, hey, there is a separation between church and state. And they were scared that the government was going to come in and take over their church. That was the problem. Where today people use it because they think the church is going to take over the government. Right. It's quite the opposite today. Listen, the church doesn't have any role in the government except to support the government and to pray for our leaders. Yep. The government should have 0 to do with what we do with our churches and what we believe. They shouldn't have any. And yet churches have been, and this is another whole episode we can have as a former pastor, like we have been complicit in participating with the government in a place that we don't belong. We now have 501c3 status. I don't think it's 501c3. There's a different letter that goes in there, and I don't remember what it is, but we have nonprofit status with the government to be treated differently than everybody else. But with that comes strings. Churches can't do certain things when they take on that identity as a corporation. So Jefferson, his letter didn't proclaim a law. It proclaimed a reality. Are the church and state separate? Sure. Is it a law? No. What's the purpose? It's to make sure that the government doesn't meddle, and vice versa. The church doesn't meddle to the extent that we want to take over things and make it Presbyterian or Methodist or Baptist or whatever it is.
Yeah. And like you said, if you would have polled me, I would say, yeah, that's in the Constitution. Separation of church and state. Yeah, it's in there somewhere. So
it's not.
Yeah.
Well, the other things, and we can make this show go on for the rest of the day. So he talked about government and religion being intertwined, and he talked about that in 1782, Congress authorized Bible printing. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we have to really look at the entire context to understand that living in 2025 with the craziness that we're dealing with and the moral depravity that's going on publicly. I mean, heck, you can get on Instagram right now and scroll and see near porn. You can hear people using all kinds of language that you couldn't have even got in front of a screen like that when we were kids to hear that, unless you went on purpose to an R-rated movie. Like you can see that now for free on your cell phone. Like, we're in a morally depraved society who now believes that Bibles represent some small schism of the American public, when in fact our country's been printing them. We've been involved in printing them, and church services being held in the Capitol and the Supreme Court chamber as late as the early 1800s. This is all true, which echoes, yes, we are built on Christian values. The Liberty Bell, which I got to go see in Philadelphia a few years ago with my wife and son, which was really, really cool. Leviticus 25:10, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. This is really, really compelling evidence that this is a Christian nation. So I think the modern relevance for us, and where we kind of need to bring this to a close here, is, can liberty survive without moral and religious people? What do you think?
Charlie says no. And I think, I'm trying to think how liberty. I'm kind of stumped on that, because I'm separating liberty, just freedom, as like freedom of speech and the freedoms that we have. There is freedom there. But as believers, like, this is not the race that we're here to run anyways. Like, our freedom isn't being free and not slaves. It's freedom in Jesus. So I'm kind of trying to framing it in my own mind as that's the freedom that I want, and that I want for our nation too. Like, that's where it's hard to separate that, when you do have different races, skin colors, beliefs, transgender, and all kinds of things going on these days. Like, how do we unify is what I want to keep going back in my brain. Like, how could it? And now it seems like we're so polarized. It's got even worse. COVID like killed the country. It seemed like it divided everyone. From even before that, you and I've had the conversation of Republicans and Democrats could disagree, but it was a civil disagreement. Versus now, it's like you want to argue and fight about everything just because the party line is divided. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, how could we even have liberty with such division going on? And that's where I'm stumped on that.
Well, I think he made a really good point when he said that because we're no longer a Christian nation, yet we have a Christian form of government that is incompatible, and that's what's causing the problems. And I believe that's true. I now would have to say that, my personal conclusion to this matter would be that America was not officially set up as a theocracy, which is what a lot of people think when you say Christian nation. It wasn't a theocracy, but the founding framework was undeniably steeped in Christian principles. I don't think there's any argument. Well, there is a lot of argument, but if we're honest, I don't think we could truly argue that. The only reason you would argue that against that is that you have something that you're trying to hold on to that would be lost if that were true. So my call to action to everybody in here is listen to things like what Charlie said. Do your research, read state constitutions, go read the Declaration of Independence again. It won't take you but a few minutes. Read the founders' own words. And what you'll find is that these young men, most of them were younger than us. Like, we think they were old white dudes. They weren't. They were in their 20s and 30s. There were a couple of people older than that, but they were young dudes who wrote this stuff. They were, I believe they were guided by God to be able to do all this. But regardless of whether you believe they were guided by God, they certainly wrote him into everything. That he is present in everything that went on. And for the few who didn't accept it, like Thomas Jefferson, they're exceptions to the rule. So is America a Christian nation? I would have to say more yes than no, but I don't think it was set up as I don't know. I still don't know how to answer that question. Like, I'm still struggling with it because I believe that it wasn't for so long. It's hard for me to say yes because of what I'm experiencing now. But the reality is, you can't deny that it was based on Christian principles. There is zero chance that you could deny that.
Yeah. And I think there's no denying if we lived by the principles, that are biblical, we would have a better nation. Absolutely. And I think one of the most beautiful things that happened in this unfortunate tragedy is just seeing the movement of God since his passing. And just from like even you, because probably bombarded with social media now, he's everywhere, is you got turned on to his content and who he was. You got to see how he lived, and so many others did. And I'm thinking, my wife, she sent this to me. A friend of ours a couple of days ago over the weekend posted a picture with his Bible, and he said, I haven't picked this up since Sunday church as a kid, but I felt compelled, as many have over the last week, to open a new page. Like, how amazing is that? So many people are like, they feel this movement of God. They see what's going on. And you're like, you know what? Maybe I've been far from God, but this is the turning point in my life where, you know what? There's something here. I need to at least seek answers. And that's what I love to see is happening, especially just to honor him in the passing is, you know what? Let's keep this in the forefront of our minds.
Well, thank you for listening to today's show. This was obviously a hot topic, and I'm certain that we're going to have lots of disagreements. Hopefully, we'll have lots of agreements as well. Please put your comments here on YouTube or in whatever podcast player that if there's comments section, please put them in there. And if you want to reach out to me directly, you can reach out to me on Instagram, YouTube, or LinkedIn at The Real Jason Duncan. And you can reach out to Justin
at Dr. Justin Moseley on Instagram or drjustinmoseley.com.
And you can reach both of us at chiselandcompass.com. Thank you for listening today. We're happy to be able to share our perspectives on these things. And we have no illusion that we're right and you're wrong, or you have to believe us. We just want to present our ideas and let you consider them. So thanks for listening. Until next time, I am the real Jason Duncan. He is
Dr. Justin Moseley.
And Jesus is King. That's a wrap on Chisel and Compass for today. For show notes, resources, and more, hit up chiselandcompass.com and follow us on social media. You can find me at The Real Jason Duncan, and you can find Justin at Dr. Justin Moseley. Until next time, keep your chisel sharp, your compass true, and never stop building what matters. This is Chisel and Compass.